Welcome to This Week in Coworking, where industry leaders get succinct, actionable insights.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the This Week in Coworking podcast feed. And boy, do we have an exciting guest for you today. I am joined today by Dean Connell. Dean, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm looking forward to having a chat and going off the cuff and speaking about all things co-working.
Dean, we're going to dive into a whole bunch of stuff, but like for people who've not had the opportunity and the privilege to hear you speak yet, give us like the one-liner. Who are you? What have you been doing in co-working for the last 12 years?
So I'd like to say I am Dean Connell, and I help workspace providers make better workspaces. And I focus around interior design, workplace strategy, and all things product and related to improving the way people experience the spaces. That's my main focus, especially today.
That is awesome. And we're going to dig into exactly how you do that in a very multifaceted way. But
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your co-working story. I mean, you didn't wake up and go to school in the UK and be like, oh, I'm going to go into like design and co-working. Tell us a little bit about your background.
So I got into design. I'm from a African Caribbean family. I'm first in my generation and first in my family, immediate family, to go to university. Up until the age of 20, I kid you not, I was destined to be a football player, soccer, for those who are listening in the States. But that didn't quite work out, as it does for many. I decided to go to university at age 20, and I decided to study my second passion, which was design, and particularly interior design, but mainly interior design because of the fact that I wanted to be an architect as well. Many dreams, I know. And I started to look at prospectuses for different universities, and the architecture design course was 7 years. And in my infinite wisdom at the time, I was like, F that, 7 years. I'm not doing 7 years studying. I want to get out after 3 years. And I said, most people spend their time inside anyway. So I'm going to study the course that focuses on the interior aspect of the design rather than the exterior. So I chose interior design. I did that for 3 years. And then for the first half of my career, I focused a lot on hospitality, leisure, and retail. So I did high street stores, a nightclub, and worked on loads of different leisure kind of F&B style projects in the hospitality sector. And then 12 years ago, I began my foray into workspace design, and in particular co-working, which I didn't really know at the time, but I joined a little startup called WeWork in 2013, May 2013. And yeah, I began my co-working journey from there.
It's been quite an epic journey. We got to chat a little bit when I bumped into you in Boston, and you've been pretty much every corner of the world doing design. Just give us a quick rundown, like where have you designed spaces?
So I joined and moved to New York in 2013, and I was there for 2 years, but my main role became one of international markets. So I started by launching the Europe market, in particular my home city, London, and then got sent across to Israel to help the team in Israel launch that market. Amsterdam, I developed the briefing and set up how we would design in the Amsterdam region market, which started the Europe expansion. And then 2016, I launched Hong Kong, South Korea, Australia, mainland China, all in that year. We did 2 projects in each city. And then 2017, I went to India, and I spent 9 months in India launching the business there and helping the local team set up the product. And then 2018, moved to China. That was an interesting story, but moved to Shanghai and spent about the first half of that year working particularly on product development and furniture development, trying to find sourcing partners. As we know, maybe now with all the tariffs, it's going to be different, but at that time, the idea of sourcing and producing furniture products and stuff in China was a good idea. And so I was out there traveling to southern China, Vietnam, and exploring relationships with different vendors, manufacturers, and how we can make our product more efficiently and save some money. But then the second half of that year, I got drafted back into the interior design, expansion, and development of the actual product in the region. And I started to launch Japan and Southeast Asia. So did Malaysia, I did Indonesia. So yeah, that's the long tail version of it, I guess. So pretty much all over Asia. And I'm ever so grateful for that experience. And then came home in 2019, home being London, and then had a baby. I didn't have a baby, but real life
Yes.
started, kids started.
I totally get that. And I'm just like fascinated. My first question is, when is the book coming?
The
Because
book.
you've got like an adventure to tell for every place. Like, are we going to get a book?
I've never thought of it. I've never thought that. I know the stories are worthy of telling. And recently, in the last year, I would say I've got a lot more active with sharing these stories via social media. And I'm still getting used to speaking to a camera and getting out of that comfort zone. But the idea of a book is fascinating. Maybe. I do like to write. And so telling some of these stories would be really interesting. And I'm just really grateful that I had the experience. I think gratitude is the key thing for me.
Absolutely. I mean, you've obviously seen a lot from like designing for these different locales, adapting, but also a lot of people were fascinated by the WeWork machine, the persona,
Yeah.
the CEO. But there was so much from just what you said that went into actually the logistics behind building this thing that became WeWork. Just like, what do you mean they sent you to China to do what? Like, who did you speak to? How did you speak to? What was the goal?
Yeah.
What were the unit economics? So there's so much just there. But I'm going to take a zoom out a little bit and just ask you, over the 12 years at WeWork, you obviously got to see a lot of changes in just the way people are working. If I had to
Yeah.
ask you what has changed the most and what hasn't changed at all, what would you say?
What hasn't changed at all? Maybe a slight nuance on that is what is still taking its time to change is the commercial real estate and the traditional office. There's still more bad offices in the world than there are what I would call good offices. And that's down to the sheer volume of traditional office and the commercial real estate industry, which is trillions of dollars. So it's understandable. It's going to take a bit of time to work through. So I would say, yeah, I still think there's a way to go to really transform commercial real estate. That's what hasn't changed. What has changed for me, which I guess is my main working thesis and the main story that I am trying to bring to the world to talk through and understand. And we were talking a little bit about it offline, is the concept of technology and the changes to technology, the rate of change and how that impacts the workspace itself. And I think that's what's the change that's happening so fast, that from when I first started 12 years ago, it was laptops and Wi-Fi. Now it's just cloud computing, the changes to the way social media and content and AI now. We mentioned AI agents. I see so many different nuances that are going to impact the office that I think we have to really pay attention to and get involved with and understand.
That is interesting. And so like from a design perspective, how do you think these technologies are changing the way we design? Obviously, we went from obviously open plan desks that facilitate a whole bunch of laptops to now what, like how do you think it's changing from a design perspective?
This may be controversial, but fortunately for me, because I'm a creative and I'm designing workspaces and co-working spaces, I'm not actually that inspired by a lot of workspace design.
Mhm.
I think that it's repetitive. I think a lot of the innovation has happened in the design. And now what I see a lot of is a lot of replication of models and format, which is not necessarily a bad thing because that's how markets mature. When more players get involved and they find the formula and then repeat it at scale. So I get that. It's the question, if the question's around kind of how has technology really changed the office and the design, I would say not that much. But what I will say is that the technology has transformed how people work. And I think this is the key inflection point, is that how we work is what's changing. And then the design follows suit. And so it's up to practitioners such as myself to help inform the marketplace and say, hey, the society's changing, the world's changing, the economy's changing. We all can feel it. It's all feeling a little bit weird. Hey, how do you distill that into a new and improved product? That's the focus. It's that bridge between society changing and how we change and how work is changing to what does then that manifest as in a physical product. So I give you an example. I had a conversation today and I met this gentleman. I've never met him before. It was just an introductory call. And so I saw his background and I was quite curious as to where he was. And he was in London. I assumed he was in London based on his background. And then we started talking. Hello, nice to meet you. And then he said, apologies, I'm not in exactly an office. And I goes, I think I know where you are. And then he said, I'm in a pub. And then I goes, I know you're in a pub. And there's this location, and I guess I'm giving them a bit of a shout out. But in London, in the London Waterloo station, which is one of the big kind of transit and international changeover points, they've a Brewdog location, which is a Brewdog. They make the beers. There's a location there, and they've become synonymous with people going to do meetings. They've got meeting rooms there. They enable the co-working spirit. And so you go in there and there's people there eating, drinking, but then there's so many people in this space working. And I said to him, I knew you was there because that space is fascinating and interesting I think it's symptomatic to what the change is. The change is that work itself is what's changed. Okay. So the physical space now is an abstract. The idea that he's sitting in a pub, these guys are not experts in work. They're not experts in co-working. They're experts in making Hazy Jane. The IPA, that's what they're experts in. Yet so many people gravitate to that space and use it because it works for them. Mm-hmm. So the point is, we need to understand and translate the office itself as an entire product and bring it up to date and make it align with the way people can work. And that's the nature of what we have to do.
Yes. I mean, it's definitely a trend. I'm a huge fan of Brewdog and their work pads or drop-in pads, which are just fantastic. Cover them a few times in the newsletter. But we're also seeing, as you said, this shift of like millions of employees from being told where they have to work to now having freedom of having an ecosystem of places they can work from. If you had asked us 5-10 years ago, I'm working from a pub, we would automatically have that image, stained carpets, chipped kind of thing, pool table somewhere in the back, maybe someone mumbling in a corner, and that's kind of the first impression you get. But that's obviously changing. We're seeing pubs partnering with co-working brands, so you're definitely seeing this ecosystem of workspaces. My question is, how do people whose job it is, and those people who said are professionals in creating and hosting workspaces, how do they adapt their design in a world where they're one of the hubs in someone's ecosystem as opposed to the place the employer sends you to go work from? If I'm a co-working space, if I'm a WeWork, right, or an Industrious or whatever, these days, there used to be a time when employers would tell their employees they have to work from a WeWork. And yeah, they might be able to go to different places in the building, but now increasingly we're seeing employees being told you can work from wherever. You can work from that pub at Waterloo. You can work from, as long as you do the work. I don't care where it's from.
Right.
So me as WeWork, how do I design my space so that I am one of the places where people want to get work done in this more agile and fluid ecosystem?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because it takes me back 12 years, and there's 3 points that I can think of that resonate with me as we think about this question. If I'm an operator, the first thing that I think you've got to think about is, I know this word is sometimes frowned upon, but the concept of community and culture, I think, is what separates the best environments from the worst ones. Now, we just mentioned Brewdog. Brewdog has a clear culture, a clear community of the brand and expression and how they put forward their identity and who they are. And people like that. So it seems to attract people that are casual but professional and laid back but down to earth. And I think that's a first point. The workspace providers have to tap into who they're trying to serve and how they want to behave and develop a culture. Because I think a lot of workspace providers at the moment, with respect, is, as I said earlier, just replicating a format and then saying they're the future of work. In fact, they're doing things that me and other designers created 12 years ago. So it's not exactly new. It's just they're putting more lipstick on it. The phrase is lipstick on a pig, but it might be a bit harsh. So that's the first thing, is really understand who you're trying to serve, the culture, how you want to behave, and who your brand and what your differentiator is going to be, how you treat people. And then it made me think of, I remember 12 years ago when I first joined WeWork, it was like, here's a laptop, there's Wi-Fi pretty much everywhere, go and help us build these spaces. At that time, WeWork lived what we were selling, behaved in the way that we were promoting the product. So in my mind, that was partly part of the secret sauce, was that we weren't just selling a product that we didn't believe in, we were actually living the exact product. And then if the final reference point is, you think about it, we put beer on tap in the offices 12 years ago, and that was like frowned upon. That was, oh, they put beer in the office. But then we go full circle to us talking about me having a Zoom call with someone who's sitting in a pub having a Zoom call, and that's okay, right? So I guess we were early, and early sometimes is synonymous with being wrong, but right over the long term. But so those are my 3 things.
I absolutely agree. I mean, so many times we work with a whole bunch of co-working space operators, mostly on their tech stack in my day job. And the amount of times I speak to them and they're like in a private office somewhere in the corner of their building, I'm like, how you should be using the same products that your members do. If you don't use a day pass once a month, how do you know how your processes work with day pass? And I think it's the same with design. Just like you said, if you don't feel it, you don't get a sense for who your culture, who's in your space, who's winning from your space, or give yourself the time to feel that and ask the questions, you're just going to be guessing and kind of shooting in the dark, which is just a terrible way to do anything from technology all the way through to design. I wanted to get back a little bit, Dean, to something you mentioned earlier about the fact that you feel that there hasn't been innovation in a long time in kind of workspace design, or for many firms. And I do feel that for many, going back to this cookie cutter approach that you referenced earlier, that design or interiors is just something they need to check off as part of a fit out, right?
Yeah.
You're one of the big advocates of constant iteration.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about why. Why is this so important? What is there to gain? And, or more importantly, what is there to lose if they don't do this?
Yeah. What is there to lose if they don't do this? I will slightly reframe it and say, I wouldn't say there's much to lose, but I try and articulate my experience through points that people seem to understand. So everyone understands WeWork's rise and fall, if it was a fall, and it understands the journey that people saw the movie, they saw the coverage, and it was like, wow, this is crazy. But what came out of all of that? Now, the first thing was there has been some innovation, but it was the model that was the innovation. It was the approach to say that workspaces or offices can be delivered in a slightly different way than the traditional model. So the idea of flex, managed, co-working, that broad section, even though the concept of shared offices, is quite old school. IWG, Regis did it for a long time. But WeWork introduced that. What I talk about is it realized the technology was changing and that people were changing, demographics were changing. And so it catered to those needs, which created a brand and then created a product that now everybody understands and can relate to. So when people think of design today, they think that, okay, we just need to go through the design process, fit out the space, and then people will come. Yet the secret sauce to create a product that's now synonymous with the category of co-working, in order to do that again, I think the process of iteration and product development is the key. And that's where design moves from being just a checkbox in the delivery process to being front of center in creating the overall experience of your product. So if now with commercial real estate is at the doors of co-working and it's kind of captured, you think CBRE with the Industrious deal, you could say commercial real estate is very much knocking on the door and the market has matured. But so it has nothing to lose because the model itself is what was unique and what's came out of the WeWork story. As far as the design is concerned, though, no one's really tackled the product innovation yet, right? Because if we at the time were a bit crazy, a bit kitsch, or a bit novel to put beer in a workspace, who's doing the equivalent of something like that now? I would struggle to find it. That's where I think the innovation will come again when someone decides that they're going to iterate on top of what's here in pursuit of something that's going to serve their audience in a way that's unique to them. I think because at the moment it's okay, co-working, we get it. We get how to do it. We get how to do a test fit. Let's do it and sell the product. But that's not really how brands and that's not how notoriety is built. So
very well.
So nothing to lose as such, because people will make a lot of money, their products will be successful, because at the end of the day, people do just want Wi-Fi and a space to work. But if anyone's going to capture the imagination again, push the industry forward, that's where I think the lessons from what we did at WeWork have value.
Of that. And so I want to go over a bit of a side, or not like a bit of a tangent. It's always said that parents should not have their favorite child. Do designers, what's your favorite like co-working design project to date and why?
Are you saying project that I've designed or just in general?
Oh, let's start with yours that you've designed as like the parent designer, and then we'll go into in general.
I guess as a designer, I'm speaking really to my designer community here. The one was the one I developed the product Old Sessions House in 22 and 23. It kind of came out then, and it's still in operation now. I developed that for Notel, and I was the chief creative kind of thinker behind that product. And so when I say I'm speaking to the designers here, I had, if you like, I had complete creative control from what furniture we were using, what was the product, and how much we were going to charge. Obviously, I didn't own the business the business case in that sense, but it was like how to translate it from product into physical reality I was very much the lead. And I was able to explore ideas that I've been thinking about office and the future of work and spatial design. And a lot of it comes down to this concept of on-demand workspace. Think Airbnb, service accommodation, business models, where you have particular styles of rooms that suggest the use case, that give you a sense of how the space should be used, how you should feel in that space, and then most importantly, how you should be treated in that space. Those three things I was exploring this idea that work is a series of moments throughout your day, as opposed to being this linear 9 to 5 commute, sign in, sign out. That's very much a 20th century view. So that's my favorite project because I got to explore a lot of the things that I talk about. I actually got to build it and see. And the team are operating it now. It was heavily event driven because I have a belief that in order to build culture properly, you need to provide alternative hooks for your space. So an example could be a co-working space that's targeting mums who struggle with childcare, so they provide some form of creche childcare services. That's the hook. And then the idea that you can sit down with your laptop and bust out some work, that's just a third space activity. That's like having a coffee. Now, that's the way I see the market. And so it's slightly nuanced compared to the traditional setup, but that's my favorite project. I'm really curious around like the independent workforce, and because I see that's rising. I was looking at some research the other day in the US. I think it's like when you look at the demographics, so you go from boomers, Gen X, millennials, and then Gen Z, you got boomers. I think if I remember the data, it's like 26% of boomers are independent workers. So saying most of the boomer generation are employed. And then you had 30 something percent for the Gen Xers. And then for the millennials, it was like 44%. And then for the Gen Z, it was like 52%. So if you plot that on a chart, it's showing that as the generations get younger, more people basically want to work for themselves. And then for me, from a technology standpoint, if you can kind of correlate that with what's going on with social media, you can see the rise of the creator economy. So I mentioned that the place that I'm interested in seeing is a place called Cube, I think in the UK, that they basically provide studios and spaces for content creators to maybe make podcasts. You know, we've all seen the rise of podcasting, especially since COVID. And so I'm interested to see their model and what they're doing, because they're providing spaces for people to record, make content, probably make music, but I haven't actually been there yet. So I can't really talk about what they offer, but I'm interested to go. But in summary, I think I'm interested to visit any co-working space or potential new workspace where work is not the primary hook.
I do love that idea of creating spaces for creators, for different types of niches. We're seeing a huge spurt of that in London right now with Space Made doing all these different types of kind of niche design spaces. Talking about being really early, I remember a Maynard Studios by Hackney Wick. Their first 2 floors were just creative studios, art studios, music studios, and that was like their jam. Then you had a co-working space at the top. But like that was very early on. We're talking 2013, 2014. So great to see kind of more of that. My last question to you though is, you're more than just a designer, right? You design, you talk, you teach, you educate people like me about things that I have no idea about, but you also design your own furniture. Tell us a little bit more about that part of your life.
When I moved back to London, and when I told you in the intro that story of my travels, this was 2019, I took on the role as head of furniture and head of global furniture. So my main kind of task for the business was to help, and this is at the time just before the kind of IPO challenges and whatnot, help the business, which is a global business at this time with locations all over the world in different regions, completely different entities, help set up a model, a system where we can have the consistent product, look and feel, but source it and manufacture it in regions, so you're not shipping products from all over the world to different regions. So I've always been a bespoke designer, so designing the details of projects. And this was an opportunity for me to explore a passion of mine, which is furniture design. You know, my granddad was a carpenter, made furniture, so did my dad, make a little bit of furniture. And I've always had a passion for it, but just never really I'm always focused on the interior side. So anyway, during this time, I remember we got called into a meeting, and executives were like, we need to get rid of the warehouses that were all across the world because they were burning a hole in the business's pocket, understandably. When you have all of this furniture sitting in different warehouses globally, and we want to close the warehouses, and they gave us like a kind of date, a target date. And then that would mean we had to either get rid of all the furniture, sell it to the market and secondhand. And so we developed a strategy where we would soft mandate that we reuse a lot of the furniture on existing projects that needed refurbishing. We soft mandated that we use this furniture on projects that were up and coming, that were already kind of on the books. We did sell some to the market. And then unfortunately, we had to get rid of some because we had like inconsistent quantities, random colors. But primarily, we had to get rid of a lot of furniture because they were just poorly made. And it was that kind of section of furniture that was poorly made that triggered my interest in designing a collection of furniture. And so I set upon this task in 21 after I had left WeWork to create a range of furniture that was what I call inherently circular. So the idea is that you have a circular economy, or for those who are not familiar with the circular economy, it's this concept that we can basically reuse and materials and reuse products without creating waste, because nature doesn't create waste. And I'm fascinated by that as someone who's interested in nature and spirituality and all this other stuff. So I set upon this task to create a furniture range where it's designed using a set of principles that mean it doesn't create any waste. So I actually can show you. This is really random. Let's see if this works. This is one of the chairs. Hopefully everyone can see that. And the idea, I created a top chair like such as this, a dining table, a credenza, and a lounge chair. It's based on 4 principles where, one, it's durable. So it's made from solid oak. And the idea is durably repairable. And that just simply means it's made using the best quality material that allows for long life, because sustainability is best if you just don't throw things away.
Yep.
That's probably the best way to achieve long-term sustainability. So the first principle is to be durable and repairable. And repairable means if you bought this chair and you're in Manhattan, or if you're in San Diego, or if you're in Sao Paulo, it's made in such a way where you can go to your local carpenter or your local person who's good with wood, and they will know what to do with it. So It's not made with complex processing, doesn't have to go to the special factory in Belgium or whatever. It's made using rudimentary, fundamental, primitive-like material that allows for it to be easily repaired over time. The second one was it needs to be versatile and stylistically versatile so that it can work in many settings. So the idea was this chair could be a meeting room chair, it could be a dining room chair, it could be just an occasional chair. And by giving it multiple use cases, it will help dealers and those who are selling the product target multi-markets, therefore hopefully penetrating more markets, extending its life. The third one was to show personality and be interchangeable. So the idea was that it's made from kind of component parts. So within the system, each part can be interchanged, not each part, but some of the parts can be interchanged, or it's produced in such a way where it's manufactured that we can replace parts. And that creates a kind of unique personality within itself. So helping drive the culture of the product. And then the final one, if all of that fails, it's recyclable. So you could just throw it out the window and it's wood, and then nature will do its thing.
I can just imagine, I definitely don't throw it out my window. I'm on the 11th floor right now. Do not recommend that. But yeah, I love this. And I'm a huge fan of the circular economy, and just this idea of furniture that is designed to last. So much more that needs to be done. But tell us a little bit more about, like, can I order this furniture? Is it manufacturable? Is it purchasable? Or is it a spec project?
The beautiful thing about the way we develop the product is it's made to order, because a big part of this idea is that we didn't want to just make excess stock that sits there idly. So it's made to order. It's can contact myself, and I work with the producer who's based in Europe, and they can produce the chair on I think it's on a 5 to 6 week lead time. Don't want to say the chair or any of the products, they can produce it. So it's based to order, and for me it was a project that I really wanted to do, because a random story. I had this dream in 2017, and it started when I was I was teetering on the edge of being burnt out with all the travel and all the work. And I remember being in India, and I said to some of the team, I said, guys, I want to retire from interior design. I'm so exhausted. And I was being a bit tongue in cheek, but my main point was I wanted to kind of pivot into the world of furniture. And I gave them this elaborate story, which I'll share with you. The elaborate story was, all right, how my brain works. When I'm 65, I want to be retired. I want to have a nice outhouse. And within my outhouse, maybe in the back of the back garden, I want to have a series of tools, hand tools, machine tools. And I want to be retired, peaceful, with maybe a nice bottle of hibiki, some Japanese whiskey, and I want to work on Japanese joinery for, say, 6 weeks with no end, just to practice and learn and appreciate the art of Japanese joinery. And I said that was my end goal. And so I want to connect the dots looking backwards from that point. And I said, might as well pivot into furniture now and see how this goes.
I love the idea of like connecting it, because that's absolutely a big part. I mean, we always design for what we have to do next and not where we want to be, and then work backwards. Dean, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for spending your Friday evening with me and us. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the content you create and for everything that you've done for Coworking, even though you're now becoming more of a song hero.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm passionate by it. I'm passionate that my experience can hopefully help those who are coming into the industry. Because the thing is, co-working is still not that known. It's not really well known when you think about it in the general sense. So I'm passionate to talk about how we can use the concept and the ideas behind co-working to create better spaces. That's the mission. Better workspaces, guys. We can do better.
Yes, we can, and we will. Thank you, everybody. We'll be back in your podcast feed before you know it. Don't forget to share this with your friends and family all around the world, especially if they're in London, and reach out to Dean about any of the topics we discussed today.